Okay, hello and welcome everybody to our webinar of the week. So August 15th is the date, and we're talking today about soil sampling, how you can gear up for the season and use FarmQA as a software product to help you collect samples, dictate where in the field you go, and also bring in the finished lab results. So that's the topic for today. Glad you're joining us. This video will also be posted afterwards if you'd like to watch it again. So with that, Ben Munson is my name. I'm a Senior Technology Specialist with FarmQA, and I'll be walking you through the demo and webinar today. A few topics. So we're going to cover basically everything you need to know about soil sampling with our software. So that would include zone, grid, composite sampling in the software. We can start from scratch, meaning that you are using FarmQA for the first time and you don't have existing data that you'd want to bring in. We can also go the other route where maybe you're transitioning off a different platform and would like to use ours to do sampling. You can upload existing points. We'll talk through that. Then the in-field side, so the mobile app, physical collection, scanning barcodes. After that, we will showcase the AgVise integration, which is the lab we're integrated with currently, to bring the lab results back in. We can also showcase our CSV import along the same lines as the AgVise data. And then we're going to show how you can visualize some of that information in the platform, looking at trend lines, looking at what fields have more or less nutrients for applications. So with that, we're going to jump right in. I want to spend most of our time in the product itself. One thing I will say before we get too far in, there's a comment section within Microsoft Teams, which you're joining on now. Please put your questions in that section, and we're going to answer them at the end of the session. So please do that. And if you have any questions at the end or you'd like to ask privately, you can reach out to us directly as well. With that said, so I'm jumping over into our platform. This is FarmQA Controller. It's the web app where we can do a fair amount of setup type work when it comes to sampling. So a couple things that we're going to touch on right away would be the AgVise integration and setting that up. So what this involves is within your account, you're going to see the soil tab on the left-hand side of the web platform. Within this tab, we have the ability to view results, but I want to direct your attention to the top where you can see labs. Right now, this is currently we're only integrated to AgVise and we're working on a few others. But to integrate or add your tie-in to your AgVise account, what you'll need to do is open up the AgVisor portal. Within settings on the top right here, you'll see API settings, and that's what you'll want to click on. You'll get a 10-digit number from that screen for which you can paste in. So in my case, we'll grab the key and I can then add a new lab, call this AgVise, paste in the key, and it will authenticate. So at this point, you can add additional keys, so there's no limit to the number of keys that you can put into the software, meaning that let's say you have different branch locations, you can put in 10, 15, 20 keys, and we're going to be actively pulling data from those different accounts and standardizing those, if you will, in FarmQA. So that's the process. Paste the key here. Your account is then linked indefinitely, so you can see successfully connected to the lab. And so that's the process to get that configured initially. Again, if you're working with a lab other than AgVise, we are working on some other tie-ins, but you can also import via CSV. So that's kind of item number one as far as setup goes, is going to AgVise, copy pasting the key in. The other thing that we'll talk through as far as setup goes, we're going to be using our work function as part of this discussion. And what this entails is within our software, you can dispatch, or perhaps you have a team of sample collectors. You can designate who needs to do what each day, or simply have these open-ended tasks which people can pick up and complete as they are available. So the way we do that is within the work tab. We're going to first create the task types. So as of right now, I do have a couple task types created. At the very bottom left, I can click the plus button and add a new task. So in this case, we'll call this out as a composite soil sample as its own category. Give this the soil sample category itself and choose an icon. So we'll say perhaps the shovel. And then you could put a description in here as well, and that would show up on every task that you create with that task type. So those are a few of the back-end things that you can think through when it comes to setting up your account to do sampling. While we're in here, I'll also call out that there are different statuses that come along with each task, and with this you can change these colors. So this will come into play when you're looking at a progress map across a team to say what's been done, what's still outstanding. You can choose the colors to represent each of those task types. So with that, so now the account's created and things are more or less configured, we're going to walk through how you can upload some existing data. So the scenarios I'm going to specifically touch on here, you have an existing set of grid sampling points with IDs that you want to upload into FarmQA and sample based on those. Same concept, but for zone sampling. So we'll upload a zone map and some composite points as well. And then we're going to hit on if you just want to start from scratch and just do, say, composites or start just GPS locating where you collect. So to start, I'm going to talk about the grid scenario. So I have a field, and in this case, if I tap on it, you see no pins, essentially no data on this field. But I have, in this case, I have a file that I'm going to upload. In this case, it's just a CSV with lat and long. Actually, sorry, this is a shapefile that I'm going to upload. So if I crack this open for the sake of understanding here, you can see a series of shapefiles, SHP, SHX, all the required files zipped together. What I can do with this is if I expand out on the left-hand side of the screen, I see my markers is what we're going to be talking about when it comes to sample points. And within that category, you see soil samples. There's a pencil icon on the right. If I click on that, I can then drag and drop that shapefile into this drop zone, and it will define those points. I can choose an attribute that I want to use as the name. So I'll do that. I'll click upload. Those points are now associated with that field. And so we can see those as what we consider to be markers, meaning that they can be used to collect samples anytime in the future. So with that being done, so those points are in, we'll talk through the same concept now, but with zones. So the scenario being you've got existing zone maps that you want to use to sample based off of. So I'm going to click on my zone field here. In this case, since we're dealing with more of a spatial file opposed to just points like we were with the grids, we're going to do it as a layer. So instead of a marker, we have a layer. Let me just clear out my test here. So within here, this is the zone map I'll upload, but we'll start from scratch. So if I clear that out, come back into the field, you see I have no layers in this case. And so what I want to do is I want to add my layer, my zone map. These are the different categories I have in my demo account. I demo a lot of different things, so there's a lot of categories, but in your case, this could simply be zone maps, maybe planting maps, yield maps, that sort of thing could be the different categories you'd see here. Once you choose, in my case, the VR zone category, I can then, in the same way I uploaded my pins, just drag and drop into the drop zone my zones. In this case, these zones came out of ADMS, and I have the different zone colors represented automatically based on the known attributes of that shapefile. And one additional thing I'll point out, we can bring in zones, but if you want to, say, manipulate them, or one key thing I would point out is you can also turn on labels and choose what attribute you want to display on the map along with that zone map. So in this case, I turned on the zone IDs just so those are visible. So that is now done. I can now use this zone map to sample in the field. With this, I'll also point out that you can upload a combination of both zones and pins. And so identical to how I uploaded the pins before with the grids, I can do that with the zone points. In this case, we'll just take the ID and upload those. So now what you get, if I click on this field, oops, looks like I used the wrong attribute for the name. So if I click on the zones, you now see the zones plus the pins, as you can see here. So there's a combination of those two data sets that you can bring in and display. The last scenario would be, I'll just show it from the web initially. we're going to talk through a composite scenario. And the point to make here at this scenario is that there's no pre-existing data. So we're going to more or less start from scratch with this composite field as part of this demo. So hopefully that walks you through some of the existing data points you might have. When it comes to uploading data, the key things to note, we would take a CSV file if it has lat and long values in it. We would take a shapefile, KML, KMZ. And so those would be, when we're talking zones, existing points, you can bring that data in with those file formats. Okay, so the next step to this, we can create a task and designate for somebody to actually collect these fields. So if I click on the work tab on the left-hand side of the screen, in my case, this is an account without any tasks to start from scratch. And so with this, we have the task types we created. Daily task is where you can see kind of the task broken out by individual. But to actually create a task, we're going to go back into the Fields tab. Here you can see the 3 different categories of fields I've created. And in this case, I'm going to select all. I'll select actually individually. So we'll do composite field. We'll create this as a composite task. So from this screen, I'm creating a task. The first window allows me to define points. And so with this, I can click into the field and I can freehand draw or drop points where I think we should collect. And so perhaps that's in a given pattern like you see here, or you can draw, a W pattern, M pattern, and create that. And the scenario here is perhaps you're a head agronomist and you're trying to send out an intern to do the collection. This would be a way, even though it's composite, you're more or less directing them on where to go within the field with these points. So we'll go ahead and save that. And the next screen brings us to a scenario where you can select how deep the sample should be collected, if it's topsoil and subsoil, or an actual numeric range for that. You can set a start and a finish date, or one or the other. So let's say we need to get this collected by the end of the month. You can set priority. Then you can assign this to an individual. So if I choose somebody to collect this, you can assign it directly and give them a note to say, send to AgVise when done. So we'll save that. We just created this task for, in this case, the composite field. In the case of the grids, it's the same initial flow. So I'm going to create a grid task for somebody to collect this. The difference that I'll call out here is because I've uploaded an existing grid, we have a button in the top left that allows you to bring in those points. And then you can do a select all to say, yes, I want to collect all these points. Perhaps, they plant a tree over here. You could then remove a series of points manually, or you can also contribute new points through that freehand method we called out before. Regardless, that's existing zones, or sorry, existing grids that we've chosen to use those points. Same screen here. So we'll say this is this topsoil sample, finished by date, and we'll assign this to a different individual. And now on the zone field, so not a whole lot else to call out here. I'm just going to create the task. So we can, in my case, I uploaded those existing points to overlay on top of the zones. And so in my case, I am just going to pull those in as part of the task. So you can see pretty streamlined to do that. And again, topsoil, maybe we'll do subsoil here as well. And save that. So that's the process of creating tickets. One thing I will call out is you can do this in bulk. So if I selected all 3 and said these are all going to be composites, I could then go through that same flow, but with fewer clicks because I'm doing it in bulk in the assignment process, the date process, that sort of thing. So that is on the setup side from the web. You can also do a lot of those same steps from mobile. So don't feel like you're tied to a computer. It can be done from mobile real time. But I do want to show a few things from the web now that we've created the tasks. So going back to the daily task view, you can see in here we have the task, and each row in this case corresponds to an individual. And then within here, you can see the dates being columns and what day a task needs to be completed. You can actually drag these around if you need to change the due dates or change the workload. So dragging that from one individual to another actually just changed the task and updated it there. Task lists, you can create custom views here for your completed work. If you needed to perhaps bill based on what you've already sampled, you can do a quick query of that by saving a view in our table and then exporting to Excel, or simply getting a to-do list for the week in a table format. So with that, those are really the majority of the setup options that we'll talk through for now. We'll jump over to the mobile app. So from this, this is a hybrid app, meaning it runs on iOS, Android, any tablet you want to take to the field. So when it comes to collection, the assumption is any device that you would like to use, you would be able to. What we'll start out with here is looking at my fields. So I've got my fields in the mobile app. You can see them from a map view along with your given location. So if you simply wanted to navigate based on the app, you could start driving towards that field and navigate that way. You can overlay a township section line, which would help the navigation process. The other thing I'll just call out to start here as well is, let's say you get a call from a grower that you don't typically work with, and they want you to sample their fields. On the fly, you can add a new field and sample it. So I will just do that here as part of our process. So I clicked add a new field. We have the draw tools at the top left where you can draw from scratch. You can actually drive a boundary using your device's GPS. So let's say I just define this quarter section, pretty straightforward. I can do that, add the field details. So we're going to call this Composite S2. You could assign it to a crop if you wanted to. You could assign it to a particular grower in your grower farm field tree. But I will now just create this field. And so that is now something that could be sampled. So this is just a free-form, most basic process on sampling, where I could now click on that field. I could enter into collect sample mode. And now I could tap, enter barcode, and start sampling this way. So what this would allow you to do is, without any existing or prior data, add a field, scan barcodes in that field. If your AgVise account is associated to your FarmQA controller account, the data will automatically flow back in when it's tested and done. But then also you can turn these points into markers, meaning that you can return to those same exact GPS points a year down the road, 3 years down the road, etc. So that is the most basic of a form of sampling. We'll focus a little bit more and go a little slower with the process with our existing zone composite scenarios. I'm going to talk through this from the work tab. So in this case, I'm an individual who I've been assigned work. So in my case, I can see all my tasks. Let me back out to the soil sample webinar. So there you go. So you can see my grid field task, my composite, my zone field. They've all been assigned to me. I can see the categories. So with these icons and the names, so I know what type of sampling I'm going to be doing. If you are all composite, if you're all zones, you don't need to give that differentiator. But you can also see the dates. You can sort this by different categories, finish by, priority, distance. So it's kind of a prioritization of your time to where you're currently located. The other thing I will call out is that when it comes to something specific to zone maps, because I upload those as a layer and an overlay, one thing that you can do is within settings in this layer sync preferences is you can choose what layers you want to sync down to your mobile device. So in my case, I'm going to choose my variable rate zones, and this will force a sync to happen. You can see that wheel spinning. The reason and the purpose for this, let's say you have a lot of planting files, yield files in your account, imagery. When it comes to sampling season, you might not care about those other layers. And so this allows you to really restrict and clean up more or less the mobile app. So it's a lighter load for us to try to load and pull down when you're collecting. Regardless, I just sync down purely those zone files that I can use. And so as part of going back in this work tab, we'll start with the zone scenario. So I click on the zone task. From here, I can see some basic details about who created the task, the priority, due dates. But the key button here would be I can edit that task. So if I wanted to say, rained out rained out, delayed, few days. So that is a comment I can give back into the, for myself, for future reference, or if you are an intern, want to communicate back to a head agronomist, for example. But the main button here is the arrow, so that will actually take us into that field, so we can see those points. I had those ugly labels I used, but the point here is that now within the 3 vertical stack button, I can turn on my zone map, and so I can see the points projected on top of my zone map. And then this would allow me to navigate in this field and see the zones, see the points. And so as I do this, let's say my GPS, or my mouse is my GPS, I can walk up to this point, tap on it, enter barcode. The more common scenario is you can scan the barcode, which I'll show here in a minute. But as I do that, click OK, it changed that icon different colors so you can see your progress of what's been collected along with those markers. So that's the zone scenario. As you collect that, those points will turn brown. When you're done with that, the entire field, you can click the check mark. You can add a note within this screen. So that's where before you submit, you could add in that note about rained out or missed point in northwest corner and save that. Now you can see my list went from 3 fields down to 2. So that's my progress. It's my to-do list. We can also talk about the grid scenario. So very similar flow here, pull the task into the field, but in this case, we have a grid instead of the zones. A couple additional things I'll call out with this scenario. Let's say you are sampling in here, you can rotate this map. So if you are, instead of going north to south, you're going east to west, but you want that to be more vertically aligned with kind of how you're driving. We can rotate this map. So this would be on the mobile app. You could take this, the map itself, and rotate it. So in other words, you can see here, my little compass rose. North doesn't always have to be north in this case, so you could pivot that. So it's rotated 90 degrees, so your angles is however you want it to be as you're driving through a row. So that's just a little pointer there. But now as far as collection goes, it's the same process when it comes to those grids. And so if I click on a point, I can then scan. The other thing to call out here is this green plus button. That will drop a GPS pin where you're standing or where your device is. And so that will more or less auto snap into those points and associate your barcodes. Or if you intentionally create a new point over here, it will drop a new point where I clicked, which should be over here in this case. So you can add additional points to your map if need be. So again, move through here, you can see your progress with the icon changes, scanning barcodes per location, and then we can submit. So the next thing I'll show, so this is composite field, but what I want to show is the actual barcode scanning process. And so this is really the same flow I showed, but this will be physically in a field. So this is myself early in the day, pull up my work tab. I have a grid soil sample laid out in a field west of our office. So you can see my green GPS, and I'll walk up to that point number 4 in this case. So you can see my GPS approaching. You can see relatively how close you are. As you zoom in, you can really zoom in tight like you're seeing here. And as I cross into the field, I then enter my barcode. So this will be fairly quick with the barcode scanner. So if I tap on that, it pulls up a camera, and then I can bring my barcode into view, scans it, and then that associates with the point. So pretty quick process there. And I just want to call out the screen there where you get the camera instead of the typing it in. So that's the view or the experience you'd get physically in that field, opposed to keying it in. So that is the process to go through on collection. So from here, you can also, this is a composite scenario, but again, click on the point, scan the barcodes, and complete that way. The other main point or large value that we provide would be as you're completing those tasks, and picture yourself as a team of 2, 3, 4 sample collectors, you want to know day to day what's been done, what's left to be done. And so the view that we can provide there, if I jump over into a different account, is a map like this. And so this is a scenario, make it a little bit bigger, where I have on the app, I have color coded this in my case, by the task status. And so in my case, red means the field is not ready to be sampled. Green means it's ready. Blue means it's done. So the major value here being, again, as a sample collector, I can know, okay, I need to go west. I'm going to pick up these 3 fields, complete those, and then maybe somebody else is going to go east. But it's a very visual reference for progress. But the key being here is you don't miss anything. It's clear what's been done versus what has yet to be done. And the colors of these fields can be changed on the mobile real time as you're collecting. So it's a very efficient way to track progress. You don't have to go back to the computer every time. It's not a spreadsheet. So that is a key component of our sampling app, is that map view. Well, now we'll turn to the web view, and we're going to talk through the lab results. So now that you've collected the samples, a couple things can be done. So we can bring in the lab results a couple ways. Like we said, the AgVise API key, if that is the method you're going, you're done after you scan that barcode, meaning that the data will automatically flow in when it's ready, and it will be displayed in the software. If you use a different lab, our CSV import process works such that you would create what we call an import profile. What this entails is that you would drag and drop a CSV file of a lab result. So let me pull that up here. And so let's say in my case, I've got a file like this. So this will pull up an example CSV. And what we're doing here when you drag and drop this into FarmQA in the template creation process is we're looking for that header information. And we're allowing you to map that out to our system to say, what column should we look to for the grower name, for the field name, for the soil sample ID, etc. You can choose which columns, which nutrients you want to pull in. And then the final screen is kind of the most important, where you map out, this is what the CSV is calling this, what nutrient is it, what's the units, sample depth, and what we call a metric, so that we can chart it out over time. So this is a one-time setup. If you're going the CSV upload method, you create the profile. Now, the next thing we'll call out, so we can actually upload some results. So the way we'll do this is in the soil tab, I have this grid sampling field. So I've got, let me delete out that example one I just scanned. So in this case, I've got all those existing points, as you can see on the right, but no results. So I purely have markers without lab results. But in this case, I want to upload them. So I'll click this icon. I've got my AgVise profile in this case. From this screen, I just need to select where in my tree this data is going to be uploaded. So in my case, this is a grid field, so I'll select that. I want it in the 2023 growing season. And I collected, let's just say this was spring sampling. Now I can drag and drop a CSV file. You can actually drag and drop up to 20 files. So if you had a series of CSVs, you could multi-select and drag them over. I just have one in this case, so I'm going to drag this into the Dropbox. Now, as that uploads, it's going to tell me the progress. It'll tell me how many were accepted. There we go. So I had 48 records imported, 0 errors. So what that represents is the 40 different icons here are markers. We brought in that reference number. You can see that the lab results broken down by nutrient over here on the right. You can view this data in different ways, so break it down by nutrient. So in this case, I see NPK on the left-hand side, and my columns are the points. I can also look at this by over time if I had multiple lab results, which we'll do shortly. So that's the process to get the data in. It's pretty straightforward with really both methods. Something I'd call out with the CSV is we restrict on the name matching. So when it comes to, for example, the grower ID and the field ID, these would need to match what you call those fields in FarmQA. So if this was grid field 1, 2, 3, those wouldn't match up because those numerics are not in the CSV, but they are in FarmQA, or vice versa. So be aware of that, but that is the process to bring the lab results in. When it comes to zone samples, it's similar. I can pull up a scenario over here where I have some lab results for zone samples, and what we would do is we could pull in the designations. So if you called those when you submitted them to the lab, I did high productivity, medium productivity, low productivity as my reference numbers, LP, MP, HP. And so you can see those categories being brought in as well and projected on the map. So those are a few things that you can see. What I want to call out with this field as well is not only do you have the different designations beyond just the sample ID numerics, this field has lab results going back multiple years. And so what you can see from here is the current average nitrogen or topsoil nitrogen result for the high productivity zone versus low versus medium. But you can also see the trend line. So you can say this is up from last year. In this case, this one was down from the prior sampling session. And then you can expand this out to see the lab results over time. So you can see the collection 19, 20, 21, 22, and the results there. You can also view this broken down by nutrient, like I was saying before, but this is a more complete data set where you're looking at the nitrogen broken down by these categories. You can drag these around if you, depending on how you want to look at them. You can sort this to see where we have the highest nutrients, or sort by nutrient itself. So that's a couple different views we provide here. We also roll up the data. So on the right-hand side, you can see that this is the average of the field for chloride, for nitrogen. So that is taking the three samples, the LP, HP, MP, and averaging that. But you can also see things like your yield history over time. So it's trying to give you an all-encompassing view of all the data that might be of value to you when it comes to looking at fertility, making recommendations on that. So there's the yield history, application history, what have you applied. This field doesn't have kind of a full data set, but you can see how that would look with an application in 2022. So with that, so we've got the lab results. One other thing I'll point out with a different example here is when it comes to, if you've got multiple data points, you can start to look at that data not only averaged across the field, but looking at it over time. So in this particular Sentinel field, this is looking at ammonia values over time. What this was actually tissue sampled, so you can see results every couple weeks, and you can see the nitrogen more or less consumption or drawdown and the reapplications throughout the season. So that would allow you to look, this is a snapshot within a season. We can provide that same view across years. So perhaps a more practical scenario for you listening is if you're looking at phosphorus or potassium levels over the last 5-10 years, you can get a trend line to see if you're losing ground, gaining ground, having that conversation about if you need to be reapplying. So those are a few things with the lab results. So once they get in, you can view them. You can also export this data. So that's one thing when it comes to AgVise data. If you don't want to use us for zone creation, we totally understand. And so with that, you could take your data and you could then export that out. So what I'll do here, I'm going to grab all my lab results, export this to Excel. And what you can see here is this is that same data, but in an Excel or CSV format, which you can then bring elsewhere. One thing our customers are really liking is you can also add in your lat and long values. So if you actually want to chart that out in a different program, Google Earth, QGIS. So what I'll do here is in the column section, if I expand that out, by default, the lat and long values, latitude, longitude values are off. If I turn those on, those will now display. I can drag those around, put those side by side. You can see I've got some empty ones for like work items. So you can turn that off and clean up your data output. So there's a lot of manipulation you can do, but then if I export this again, the point to be made here is the lat and long values are included. So you can then map that out in a different system with the coordinates plus the nutrient results. But all processed through our barcode scanner, pulling the lab results back in. The other thing you might want to do, we'll just touch on this briefly, is if you have, let's go back to this field here. So we uploaded the grid of data, meaning there's a lab result per icon. In this case, what you can do is you can use the zone creation tool to write a variable rate prescription based on the uploaded results. And so in this case, I'm going to call this webinar zones. You can see on the right-hand side, this is the visual representation, each value being, in this case, the BS calcium percent, but I can change this into, let's say, my potassium, and now you can see potassium levels across the field, or perhaps organic matter. So with this, you can then break this into zones. So let's say I don't want any zones less than a 1/4 acre. I want a 5-zone map. I can now preview that, and we're going to break that into those corresponding zones. You can edit this to a point, so you can change the zones where, let's say, you want to more or less dissolve this point into the lower zones. You can choose that to be a zone 3, tap on that, and it would dissolve these points. You can create a grid and then manually paint these cells. So let's say we want to commit that change. I want to create a grid, maybe a 30-foot grid of this data. Actually, we'll call that 40-foot grid. And now we can commit that, and it will break this data into the grids, and we can then paint that individually when it comes to editing those zones. So that's part of the process here. So now you can see that's gridded out. And if we now do that same change zone setup, and let's say in this case we want to smooth out some of these edges, you could then do that now at a more granular level because we created that into we gridded that data. From here, you can then create your prescription. So we could say that this is going to be a map. You could add multiple attributes. So if you wanted to do PNK, you could add a separate attribute here to put whatever you wanted. And in this case, I'm going to stick to just one attribute. On the next screen, these would be, I guess in this case, I kept it at organic matter. So these are organic matter ranges per zone. And then I could put in my values to say, I want to put a higher amount on my lower organic matter and a lower amount here. But then with this button at the top, I can autofill those zones. You can see product totals per zone, total more or less load sheet, and then you can download this to a shape file, which could then be uploaded. So that is kind of hopefully round tripping that data for you from kind of start to finish. The other factor here that we can do is we talked about viewing this data across time. So with that, we can show that same view from the map. So let me actually go into this demo account. And what I want to showcase now is not only can we show this data across time within one individual field. So in this case, I'm going to go back into 2021, and these would be similar line charts that we showed previously are on that soil tab, but from the map. So it's more or less a different way to access that same information, where we can see the data per location, per site. So I can tap on these individual icons and see the results per spot. I can see them averaged, but the point I want to make here is within analytics, this is where you can see an entire soil dashboard where not only is it looking at the trends within one field, but it's trends across fields or over time. So a couple things to call out here. On the left-hand side, this is looking at potassium levels averaged by all my beet crops, corn crops, soybeans. So I can see kind of how those stack up to each other over time. I could look, this is what I call my nitrogen consumption map. So with that PADL data, I can give each field a color association on a scale of red to green and see the progress or consumption on that field from it starting out with relatively high numbers to it dropping down into a lower range throughout that season. So with that, we have a full webinar just on analytics, so I won't go too deep into this, but this is another way where you can start to look at trends across fields and look at those levels. So with that, one specific view I will show when it comes to analytics that is new and relevant to this conversation is you can break this data down by field. And actually, I'll say that I want to cover a few more things before the end of the time. So we can break it down. What I was going to say is by field, so you can look at if you have 30 fields. The fields on the left would be the lowest, fields on the right would be the highest, and you can see that progression over time. So with that would be the field option. But one thing I want to touch on here would be I mentioned I did a lot of my setup from the computer. I want to quickly show how you can do this all from the app. So let's say you are sampling, you are maybe you're just an independent agronomist. Note that you can do everything I showed, but more or less on the fly, so you don't have to be tied down to a computer. So what I'll do in this case is I'm going to jump over into my account that's more of a cleaner setup. So I'm going to go into the work tab, and the scenario we'll talk through here, I'm going to have no task, maybe I got one task, is I know I need to assign an individual to do some sampling, and I just got the call from the grower. He said, yep, go ahead and sample these several fields. So from the mobile side, I can click this green plus button. I can choose my task category. So let's say grid sampling. I can select my fields. And the key thing here is I can multi-select. So I could say I need to grid sample all of his fields. So you can grab a series of them there. Once I select them, and you can select from the list view or the map view. So from the map view, it would be a scenario where you can grab your fields. Let me go back into that. You could see your fields all on one map, and this is where you could select. So you could click from the map and choose those fields to sample. So that's what you're seeing there. So once you select the fields, then you'd have the option to define those points. So as we described before, so you have the define location option. And within here, you can see this is kind of a bulk process. So I can say the grid field, I'm going to define those points, but I'm going to create the grid on the fly. So right now, there's this little icon on the far right. That's my ability to create a grid. Let's see here. Let me exit out of mobile mode quick. All right, so come back into the fields. We should be able to select the fields and define locations. Grid. There we go. So let me jump back into mobile. So what this looks like is you get a series of pins projected with even distances between them. So this is a 1 acre grid I'm showing on my field. I can adjust that to say I want a 2.5 acre grid, set that. Now I can rotate this or move it. So if I want to say I want this a particular alignment here, make sure this is kind of falling within the field as much as possible, and then commit those. So now that is a series of pins that you just created. A couple of these are right on the boundary, so I can tap on those individually and delete those. And then I can define. So now you can see I've got 49 points within this. I can do the same thing over here, commit that, define points. And so it's pretty efficient and elegant to create those from the mobile app. I can then assign. So this would be a similar process as before. Sample depth, who it's assigned to. Let's say here's my list of users. Create that. Okay, so now those would be in a task list that just more or less got dispatched as part of this process, but it all happened from the app. So that was the point I wanted to make here, is that you didn't have to be doing it from the web, and it's mobile supported as well. So with that, I think we'll wrap up on time. We have we're available for questions here. Hopefully we have some in the chat, which I'll check. If not, you can reach out to us via our options here. So if you see on my screen, we've got my email direct, Ben Munson, FarmQA. My number, we have also got our support line, support@farmqa.com. And we will also, like I said, be posting this webinar. So if you want to rewatch it, it's going to be available to you to watch it, slow it down, pause it, and go through this yourself. So with that, I'm going to be looking for questions, but if there are none, we appreciate you joining us today.